After the infernal intensity of all that demon slaying in my last couple of videos, I really felt like playing something a bit more casual, a bit more relaxed. So I cast my mind back to my Mega Drive days and picked out a bunch of games that I enjoyed at the time, but which probably don't warrant a full video of their own, either because they're too simple or because I'm afraid they might be too dated to get much enjoyment out of now I'm older and wiser. Well, older. Wait, have I done that joke before? Yeah, that's the problem with senility. Anyway, these are all games that I have fond memories of, and today I'm going to find out just how closely those memories align with reality. First up, California Games. There was a whole series of games, by which I mean there was Summer Games and Winter Games and World Games and various sequels. If you've never played any of these games, and if you're under a certain age you very probably haven't, they were essentially collections of mini-games based on various sports. Summer and Winter Games depicted the Summer and Winter Olympics, as you might expect, while World Games represented a number of more obscure sports, and that's sports in inverted commas, like caber tossing and log rolling. I played the Master System versions of most of the games, and I greatly enjoyed them, but the only one I ever owned and played extensively was the Mega Drive version of California Games. It features 5 sports or activities, so let's take a look at each of them. First up is half-pipe skateboarding, which is probably the simplest of the bunch. You press down when you're going down, up when you're going up, and tap a button at the highest point of the jump to turn around and land safely. There really isn't much to it, but it's still kind of fun. It's satisfying to get into the rhythm of it, and there's a real risk-reward strategy at play. The higher you are when you turn around, the more points you get, but leave it too long and you crash. 3 crashes and you're out. But if you're going for a high score, even 1 crash is basically enough to disqualify you, given the time it takes to get back into the swing of it. Of course, these days the notion of going for a high score in a game is kind of an outdated notion, something that has niche appeal at best. But with a game like this, it's pretty much the whole point. Anyway, next up is footbag, and this is the sport that I spent far and away the most time with. In fact, I'd say footbag makes up 90% of my time with California Games over the years. There are 2 reasons for this. Firstly, it's easily my favourite. Secondly, unlike all the other sports which have set time limits or specific courses, footbag has a time limit that can be extended. So while the other sports take at most 2 minutes per attempt, footbag can easily take 15 minutes, or much longer if you're truly skilled. Actually, I'd be willing to bet there are people out there who can extend the time limit indefinitely. For me, I think my record back in the day was around half an hour. Compared to the other mini-games, footbag is relatively complex. Tapping a button performs a specific move based on where the ball, or bag, whatever, is in relation to your body. If it's above your head, for instance, you'll do a headbutt. Or if it's slightly off to one side, you'll hit it with your shoulder. If it's lower down, you'll kick it back up, or perform some other foot-based action depending on where exactly the bag is. You can also rotate 180 degrees, with some moves only being available when your back is to the screen. There are a number of specific combinations of moves, and these are where the real points are earned. Kick it from one heel to the other, for instance, that's a horseshoe. Head the ball, turn around while it's in the air, head it again, that's a dizzy dean. Do it one more time, that's a headbanger. Kick it up with a heel into a headbutt, then down to kick it up with the other heel, that's a doda. And if you do the same thing in reverse, it's a reverse doda. I don't know what the word doda means, but I do know that they're the key to getting insanely high scores. You see, a doda and a reverse doda are each worth 5,000 points, and each time your score goes past a multiple of 10,000, a clock appears above your head. Hit the clock with the bag and you get a bonus 15 seconds. Now, since doing a doda plus a reverse doda nets you 10,000 points just by themselves, and since doing so takes significantly less than 15 seconds, you can see how it's possible to extend the time limit pretty much forever, as long as you're good enough at that one trick and hitting the clock. Once you get the hang of it and get a feel for the timing and the positioning, it really is a lot of fun, and it can make even a doddering old man like me feel somewhat skillful. But it's not endlessly fun. I keep this run going for nearly 15 minutes, and that's probably long enough, to be honest. On to the next sport. Which is surfing. Like the half-pipe, this is all about risk versus reward. Bigger tricks are trickier to pull off, but get you a higher score. First though, you need to build up a bit of speed by moving up and down the wave. The controls here are as basic as they come. Press right to turn clockwise, left to turn counterclockwise. And that's it. And yet, this minigame too is a lot of fun to get right. When you launch off the top of the wave, you must return at the same angle you left, relatively speaking, and you don't have much time to maneuver yourself back to the required angle. You can score even higher if you can do a full 360-degree turn, which requires a lot of room and a good build-up of speed. To be honest, even after all these years, I'm still not precisely sure what you need to do to maximise your score. You only get a score out of 10, with no indication as to what led to that verdict. Obviously, big tricks and not falling off help, but are you better off doing a few big tricks or a whole heap of smaller jumps? How much does being under the wave affect your score? How about hitting the beach balls? One of life's great mysteries, I suppose, that may never be solved. Not by me, anyway. There's probably a dozen videos on YouTube of people who have done rigorous scientific analysis, or, I don't know, just looked at the game code. Oh, and the music for this event is, well, does it remind anyone else of Echo the Dolphin? That may not be a coincidence. The Mega Drive port of California Games was handled by Appaloosa, aka Nova Trade, who also developed the Echo series. Right, on to my least favourite event, skating. The controls are fine. You press up and down repeatedly to build speed, hold B to crouch and release it to jump, while also pressing back with the correct timing to do a spin for bonus points. But the course is strewn with hazards, and while you get points for tricking over them or simply avoiding them, they come too thick and fast to be anything other than frustrating. Worst of all is the clone skaters coming from the opposite direction. I swear they want nothing more than to pound you into the concrete. It's not terrible, but I prefer to spend my time on the other events. The last of which is BMX. This is another risk-reward sort of thing. You tap the C button to gain speed and hit B to jump. If you press up or down at the same time you jump, you can do a trick, and the longer you hold the button down, the more points you get. Hold it down just a fraction too long and you crash. On a 360 that's okay, you get 3 crashes before you're kicked out. On a backflip though, holding on too long can cause you to land on your head, eliminating you immediately, presumably because you're dead. It's another decently fun event, but the timing always seemed a little iffy to me, and success has more to do with learning the course than actual skill. So then, how has California Games held up after all this time? Is it still a decent game? Well, yes and no. I personally still find it quite a lot of fun, but that's almost entirely due to Footbag. The other events are fine, but not really worthy of any significant time investment. The thing is though, I think California Games is a great example of just how far games have evolved in the last 30 odd years, and how grateful we should be for that evolution. After all, this small collection of 5 simple minigames was considered sufficient content for a full-price game in ages past. With my rose-tinted glasses cast aside, I can safely say we get better value for money these days. Anyway, on to the next game, which is Ayrton Senna's Super Monaco Grand Prix. I love Formula 1, even with all its changes and problems, and despite all the complaints I might have about certain things, I still love it. But when I first played Ayrton Senna's Super Monaco GP2, I didn't really know what it was. Cars going fast, that about covered it in my mind. I certainly had no idea who Ayrton Senna was. And furthermore, I'd never played a racing game that I actually liked. I tried a bit of Super Hang-On and Outrun, and they were okay, but didn't keep me interested for more than a little while. But somehow GP2 really drew me in. I spent many hours on its relatively advanced career mode, and I have fond memories of zooming around its many circuits. But can a racing game from the early 90s have anything to offer these days? I've come to absolutely love racing games. It's a genre I spend more time on than just about any other. But more than just about any other type of game, racing games have changed massively thanks to improved technology. But yeah, let's have a look at GP2 and see if I can wring any nostalgia juice from its desiccated husk. I start off with a few practice laps around Spa in Belgium, one of the all-time great racing circuits. And man, this thing is fast. I get my lap time down to 40-something seconds, which is an entire minute faster than the F1 record for the circuit. Actually, it's not that the car is especially fast, its top speed is comparable to a real F1 car. The thing is though, this car doesn't need to slow down for corners. The best strategy seems to be never take your finger off the accelerator, never touch the brake. Even if you run right off the road, you lose much less time than if you'd hit the brake. Today's F1 drivers would kill for a car like this. For comparison, this is the famous bus stop chicane in a more modern racing game. This is the same chicane in GP2. You probably don't need a stopwatch to tell you which car made it through faster. And GP2 is using the older, slower version of the track. Slower. Not quite. Then there's the World Championship mode, a simulation, and I use the word advisedly, of the entire Formula 1 season. Actually though, if you select the Master mode, you can work your way through multiple seasons, and this is where I spent most of my time when I first played this game. It's relatively sophisticated for the time. You start off in a low tier team, and if you do well over the course of a 16 race season, you may get promoted to a better team at the end of it. It can turn into quite a long process, as it can take 4 or 5 whole seasons to get to the top of the pack. Each race is only 6 laps in length, but still, this mode gave the game a longevity that many other racing games of the time lacked. That said, is it worth playing today? Well, objectively speaking, I can't really say it is. If you're interested in the evolution of racing games, sure, it's a great example of where the genre was at, and it's still playable without any major flaws or annoyances, but racing games these days just do everything better. Okay, next game is Predator 2? Yep, Predator 2. It doesn't exactly have the best reputation amongst Mega Drive games. Few people seem to remember it, and those that do don't seem to remember it fondly. But for some reason I do. I hired it from a video shop during the summer holidays, and I really loved it. Why did I love it? Well, that's something I can't quite remember so clearly. The title screen is accompanied by an oddly upbeat little tune, not really something I'd associate with a terrifying alien hunter of men. Worse though is the selector noise, genuinely painful to the ears. The actual game itself, okay, it plays surprisingly well. It's fast-paced and sufficiently responsive. With a bit of practice you'll soon be a walking fountain of bullets and death. But that's nearly the limit of the positive things I can say about Predator 2. It's not an attractive game. It seems the developers caught on to the trend of making games boringly brown and grey and dingy a decade or more before the trend actually existed. The character sprites aren't much better. Even the predators themselves, when you finally encounter them, just look like indistinct blobs of brown. The environments range from bland to downright ugly, and the same could be said for the music. The only half-decent graphical touch is the predator head that shows up in the corner of the screen from time to time, looking down on you. It's kinda creepy. The gameplay itself gets very repetitive very quickly. Most of the time you'll be blowing away nondescript goons and looking for hostages, with only a few predator fights to break things up, and those are hardly anything special. It quickly becomes apparent that you're better off just ignoring the goons where possible and heading straight for the hostages. You see, if you take too long, the predator will align his iconic triple laser sights over the hostage, and then boom, an explosion of gore. I thought predators were honourable if nothing else, so it's kind of surprising to see them killing prey that's not only unarmed, but completely immobile. Oh well, that's hardly this game's biggest flaw. And it's quite a short game, which may be a flaw, or a plus point, depending on your perspective. Personally, I'm going for the latter. There are only 7 levels, the first 6 of which take only a few minutes each to complete. The final level, on the Predator's ship, is larger, but that sure doesn't make it better. With a bit of practice, I'm pretty sure you could waltz through everything this game has to offer in less than 20 minutes. Honestly, I think that may have been part of the appeal it held for me back in the day. I'm crap at games now, but I was almost as crap back then too, so it was nice to come across a game I could demolish in short order. And like I said, I only hired it, which was probably the optimal way to play it. I could complete it, master it, return it, and only be left with a vague sense that I had fun. Now though, yeah, this is not a good game. It could have been good, there's some solid top-down shooter gameplay there, but the rest of the game design completely fails to capitalise on it. Right, next game, which is Warne Cricket. As an Australian, I'm contractually obliged to like cricket. Breach of this contract would see me exiled to Antarctica, and even there I imagine the polar scientist would shun me. But I do like cricket. Kind of. I'm not a dedicated fan. But, you know, if it's on, I'll watch it. For a while. I don't like Shane Warne though. Great bowler, bit of a douche. Nevertheless, this game was a big favourite of mine back in the day. The gameplay is pretty damn simple, and you probably don't need to know anything about cricket to understand it. In fact, the whole thing really isn't too different to a California Games event, or maybe two events, one for the batting, one for the fielding. Batting is a lot more fun, so let's start with that. It really is simplicity itself. The bowler lines up their shot, you move yourself left and right to give yourself the best angle, press B to ready your bat, then, at the precise right moment, press B again with any of the 8 directions on the pad to execute a shot. Timing and shot selection are key, and it's really quite satisfying to get it right and launch a ball over the boundary for 6. And, also like some California Games events, and like real cricket come to that, risk versus reward becomes a big factor. You can play defensively, sure, but to win you need runs, and to get runs you need to at least try to hit the ball. And for me at least, there's a limit to how long my patience lasts, and eventually I'm going to start swinging for the boundaries. And the game allows that, with the inclusion of a dedicated smash it button. It seems to be a real desperation tactic though. For me at least, it feels like you've got a maybe 1 in 5 chance of getting a boundary and a 4 in 5 chance of being caught. The bowling is a lot less fun, mainly because it requires almost zero skill and judgment. You pick out a spot to aim for, time a button press for maximum spin or power or swing, then mash that same button for more speed. Yes, there is a slight challenge landing in the centre of the gauge and aiming for the right spot on the pitch. The target moves around somewhat erratically, but it's not much of a challenge. The fielding is actually more of a challenge. You have to react pretty quickly, but you can actually choose automatic fielding, and if you don't do that, the CPU will have a real advantage as it very seldom makes mistakes in the field. I recommend only having it on manual when you're playing against a real human. Not that balance issues really matter once you figure out how to break the game. You see, when you're bowling you can select a swing bowler, aim for a certain area, go for maximum swing, and the CPU batsman will take a swing and a miss almost every time. Get this down, and your opponents will be lucky to get 2 or 3 runs before you get lucky and either hit the wicket or get them out caught behind. You'll have to take my word for it though. I could do it way back when, but I wasn't able to figure out the sweet spot this time round. Which is fine really, cheap tactics like that kind of make the game pointless. When played as intended though, it's not bad, for its time at least. I'm afraid this is another game that hasn't exactly aged well. There's nothing wrong with it as such, there's just not a lot to it. But hey, that's why it's in this Smorgasbord video. Next up, it's Psycho Pinball. Of all the games featured in this video, this is probably the one I've spent the most time on. I just became very addicted to it at one point. Now, I know plenty of people are kind of dismissive of pinball in video game form, and I get that. It's just not the same without a real, solid, 3-dimensional ball zooming around a table filled with genuine mechanical gadgets and lights. But I don't think that makes video game pinball worthless, far from it. For one thing, many of us cannot afford a single real-world pinball machine, let alone the dozens upon dozens that are available in digital form. For another thing, a lot of what makes pinball worth playing, the challenge, the pursuit of an ever higher score, the joy and despair of seeing physics work both for you and against you, are still present in video game adaptations, even if the physics is simulated. Nowadays we have highly sophisticated pinball games that represent both the look and feel of real pinball to an impressive degree of accuracy, but even in the 16-bit days, I for one love digital pinball. I can't claim to have played every pinball game from that era, but of the ones that I did, Psycho Pinball was the one I had most fun with. There are 4 tables, and the primary way to play is the multi-table mode. You can also choose to play any table individually, but I rarely feel the need to do that, as the multi-table mode will almost always take you to the other 3 tables anyway. In this mode, you start on the circus table, probably the most open and easy of the 4. Hitting the right targets will open up pathways to the other 3 tables. Once on another table, you get essentially 1 ball to score as many points as you can, and when that ball drains, you're sent back to the circus table. Then the cycle starts again. Once you get a feel for it, games can actually last a long time, as it's not too difficult to access the other tables, and you can only lose a ball on the circus table. On the whole, the tables are pretty damn good. The Halloween table is probably my personal favourite, with its 4 flippers, generously sized main ramp, easily accessible multi-ball mode, and main theme involving the collection of ingredients for a witch's brew. The underwater table is also a lot of fun, and basically consists of 2 play areas stacked on top of each other. The Wild West table, on the other hand, actually it's good too, but it is significantly harder than the others. For me at least, I find it tough to get a decent score going before the ball drains down the centre. It's still a fun table though, with some wild and wacky ramps to aim for. There's also a number of basic minigames that can be accessed, but they're not really all that fun or interesting, and when I play I tend to actively avoid them if I can. Of course, any pinball game is only as good as its physics, and I'm happy to say the physics in Psycho Pinball were fantastic for its time, and are more than sufficient even by today's standards. Certainly the feeling of weight and momentum is good enough for all but the most discerning player. The only downside is that the simulation does seem a bit rigid in places, by which I mean I sometimes get the impression that it's not actually simulating anything, strictly speaking, but just running the ball through set motions based on exactly how you hit it with the flipper, possibly with a bit of randomness added in. And honestly, I suspect that is indeed how it works. An actual physics simulation might be a bit much to ask from a Mega Drive. Nevertheless, it's rarely an issue, and only something you'll notice once you've been playing for quite a while. So is it worth playing today? Well, yeah, I'd say it is. I mean, it's not going to convert anyone who's morally opposed to the very idea of digital pinball, and there are plenty of pinball games out there with more complexity and better physics, but it's still fun and worth trying out for the sake of variety at least. Okay, on to the final game I'm going to look at in this video, and I've saved the best for last. It is Sensible Soccer. In terms of sheer quality, this game is worthy of its own video, but without being a hardcore fan of the Sensible Soccer series, or of soccer games in general, it's probably best if I don't try to stretch it out that far. And it's true, I can't really claim to be a proper fan of soccer games. I've played quite a few of them over the years and got a fair bit of enjoyment out of them, but I've never had more than a passing interest in them. Sensible Soccer, though, is different. It's easily my favourite soccer game of all time, and I guess that's largely due to the fact that it doesn't really attempt to be a simulation. Despite that, though, I honestly believe it does the best job of actually capturing the excitement and speed of soccer at its best. Remember a month or two back when I talked briefly about the notion of playability? No, of course you don't, because no one watches my videos, which I cry about every night. Seriously though, thanks to those of you that do watch, especially my small band of subscribers, I do genuinely appreciate it. Anyway, what was I talking about? Right, playability. Yes, Sensible Soccer is playable to the extreme. Your tiny little players race around the field as if greased lightning had been distilled down to pixel form and then assembled in a rough approximation of a human being. They pass, kick and shoot with pace and accuracy. They perform slide tackles with the savagery of... who's a soccer player known for their willingness to destroy the ankles of the opposition? You probably know that better than I do, so just imagine I said their name in that sentence. Incidentally, I'm aware I'm probably offending a chunk of my audience by using the word soccer, and I apologise for that, but I hope you'll accept that here in Australia we have several ball games that prefer to be known as football, and soccer isn't at the top of the list. And hell, this game is called Sensible Soccer after all. There are 2 main elements that I consider to be the main reason Sensible Soccer is just so damn fun to play. First is the passing, which is really a perfect example of how humans and AI can work together. You can only move in 8 directions, so it's really not possible to precisely aim your passes, but the AI steps in to make sure that the ball goes to the player you want it to go to, and furthermore make sure that the receiving player is in the right place to take possession. In a lesser game, this might seem like the AI is being too heavy-handed and playing the game for you, or else your passes might frequently go where you don't want them to, but in Sensi, a perfect balance has been reached. The second element, simple as it may sound, is the player switching when you're on defense. Somehow Sensi seems to know exactly which player you'll want to control next. Other soccer games, even much newer ones, often seem to struggle with this, but not Sensi. It gets to the point where you don't really need to visually confirm that, yes, you're controlling the player you wanted to be controlling. You just assume you are without thinking about it, and 99% of the time you'll be right. And then there's the shooting on goal, and the way you can curve the ball that just feels so right, and the way you can cunningly steal the ball right away from the opposition's feet. It's all fundamentally simple, but it rewards skill and practice, and everything comes together to create pure gaming fun. There's another reason Sensi sticks so fondly in my memory, if you'll excuse the diversion, and it's got nothing to do with the gameplay. You see, I'm a bit of an Anglophile, and Sensible Soccer, along with the magazine Mean Machine Sega, was one of my earliest exposures to British culture, but it provided that exposure in a rather odd way. You see, Sensi features many teams broken into 3 categories. There are national teams and club teams, each of which feature players whose names have been changed just enough to avoid legal ramifications. Ryan Goggs was one I remember clearly, largely because his real-life counterpart, Ryan Giggs, was one of the best-known players in one of the best-known teams at the time. But there was a third category, the custom teams. This consisted of dozens and dozens of completely fictitious teams with silly names, and all the players on the team had names that fit in with the theme of the team name. The team called Pizza Toppings, for instance, has a goalie called Salami and a defender called Mushroom. The team called Australia, which I played most of my games as, is not in this case a representation of our national team, but instead a collection of stereotypical words like Barbie, Billabong and Sheila, and other words I've never used in my life. But the thing that caught my attention were all the British-centric teams, and the baffling array of slang terms amongst their player names, most of which I'd never heard of and seemed rather exotic and appealing. There was the exclamations team with players like Brill, Call Blimey, and Well I Never. There was Farewells United with Tara, Toodlepip, and Laters Dude. Okay, they weren't all shining examples of the British lexicon. The one I remember best was the team at the Chippy. At the time I didn't know that Chippy just meant a fish and chip shop, and players like Haddock and Cornish Pasty mystified me. All I knew was that I yearned to one day stroll into one of these amazing exotic chippies and order a chip butty, whatever the hell that was. Anyway, is Sensi worth playing today? Oh yes, absolutely. That said, I don't know if the Mega Drive port is the best version. It's the only one I've played, but the series started its life on the Amiga and is arguably one of that platform's best loved games. Regardless, I can safely say that the Mega Drive port, taken on its own merits, is a fantastic game and will still yield more fun and more excitement than most other soccer games. Well, that concludes this list. I hope you've enjoyed taking a look at this rather random list of games that don't have much in common, other than the fact that, for a time at least, they provided me with a great deal of enjoyment. Not all of them hold up in the modern world, and, well, in retrospect, Predator 2 didn't even hold up in the ancient world of the early 90s, but even so, I found it interesting to consider just how much gaming has changed and grown. It was a simpler time back then. Was it better? Well, yeah, for me it was, but that's got more to do with the fact I was a child than with any objective measure. And ultimately, I'm glad to have been able to witness the evolution of games over the last 30 plus years. And now I'm looking forward to seeing what the next 30 years have to offer. For now though, get off my lawn.